The first time she laughed at him, it echoed across a hall carved from living crystal. The court of the Aurelian Empire was not a place for humans. Towering alien nobles with skin like polished obsidian and eyes glowing faintly gold lined the chamber. Their armor shimmered with shifting light, powered by technologies humanity could barely comprehend. At the center of it all stood Empress Lyra Vale, ruler of 1,000 worlds, feared across galaxies, and utterly beyond anything a human could ever hope to understand. And beside her stood him, Kael Riven, a human unarmored, unaugmented, unremarkable. When the Empress introduced him as her consort, the silence that followed was not respect. It was disbelief. Then came the laughter, soft at first, then spreading, then unstoppable. Lyra herself had smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, but with amused curiosity. "You," she had said, tilting her head as if examining a strange artifact. "This fragile creature is what Earth calls its strongest." Kael didn't answer. He only stood there, steady, his eyes scanning a room filled with beings who could crush him without effort. That silence made them laugh even harder. Bianchi and Kael hadn't come to the Empire by accident. Earth was dying, not in flames, not in chaos, but in slow, inevitable collapse. Its resources had been stripped, its atmosphere poisoned, its governments fractured. When the Aurelian Empire arrived, they didn't conquer. They absorbed. Planets that submitted were granted survival. Those that resisted were erased. Earth chose survival, but survival came at a cost. Every integrated world had to offer something of value. Technology, resources, genetic diversity, or diplomacy. Kael Riven had been chosen not because he was the strongest, but because he was the most adaptable. A former strategist, a soldier who had survived battles against impossible odds, and a man who understood one crucial truth. Strength wasn't always about power. Sometimes it was about endurance. He was sent as a representative, a symbol. What he became instead was something no one expected. Middle life in the Aurelian court was a constant reminder of his insignificance. He couldn't match their speed, their strength, their intelligence. Even their lifespan dwarfed his. They saw him as temporary, disposable. Lyra herself treated him like an experiment. "Humans are fascinating," she would say, circling him during their private conversations, "so limited, yet so persistent. You cling to survival like it's defiance." "It is," Kael replied once. She laughed again, but over time, something changed. The first test it began with a border conflict. A rebellious system on the edge of the Empire refused integration. Their fleet was small, their technology outdated, but they were unpredictable. The Aurelians sent a squadron. It was destroyed. Then another died it again. The court was confused, frustrated. "How does an inferior force keep winning?" one general demanded. Kael spoke. "They're not fighting your way," he said. The room fell silent. Lyra leaned forward, intrigued. "And what is our way, human?" "You rely on superiority," Kael replied. "They rely on desperation." The court murmured. Lyra studied him carefully. Then, after a long pause, she gave an order that shocked everyone. "Let him command the next fleet." Laughter returned, louder than before. "A human? Commanding Aurelian forces? This is absurd. He'll be dead before the first engagement." Lyra didn't care. "Let us see," she said calmly, "how desperation performs against superiority." The Battle of Kareth-9. Kael's fleet was smaller than the ones before it. He chose it that way. He stripped down the ships, removed excess power systems, altered their formations into something the Aurelians had never used before. They questioned him constantly. "This is inefficient. This is illogical. This is weak." Kael ignored them. When the battle began, the rebel forces struck fast, just as they had before, but this time, something was different. Kael didn't engage directly. He retreated. The Aurelians were shocked. "You're surrendering?" "No," Kael said quietly. "I'm teaching them confidence." The rebels pursued, exactly as he predicted. They overextended. They broke formation. They celebrated too early, and that's when Kael turned. Not with brute force, but with precision. He used their momentum against them. Split their fleet, isolated their strongest ships, forced them into positions where their own tactics worked against them. The battle ended in a single cycle, decisive, clean, unthinkable. When Kael returned, the court was silent. No laughter, only uncertainty. Lyra approached him slowly. "You didn't overpower them," she said. "No, you made them defeat themselves." Kael met her gaze. "They were never the threat," he said. "Your assumptions were." For the first time, Lyra didn't laugh. The Empire's shadow victory should have secured Kael's place. Instead, it marked him. The Empire thrived on dominance, on hierarchy, on the belief that strength was absolute. Kael had introduced something dangerous: doubt. Whispers spread through the court. "If a human can outthink us, what else are we wrong about?" Lyra sensed it immediately, and so did her enemies deep within the Empire. Factions began to move. Silent, calculated, patient, Kael wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was a threat to the very foundation of their rule. Climax: the attack came without warning, not from outside the Empire, but from within. A coalition of high-ranking commanders launched a coup, striking directly at Lyra's core systems. Communication networks collapsed. Defense grids turned against their own. The capital fell into chaos. Lyra was targeted first, and Kael was left alone. The palace burned. Alien warships clashed above the atmosphere, tearing the sky apart with energy that could annihilate continents. Inside, Kael moved through corridors, filled with fallen guards and shattered technology. He wasn't supposed to survive this, but survival was something humans understood better than anyone. He found Lyra in the throne chamber, wounded, her armor cracked, her strength fading. "You should leave," she said weakly. "This is not your war." Kael shook his head. "It became my war the moment you made me part of this empire." She looked at him. Really looked this time, not as a curiosity, not as a lesser being, but as something equal. "They will kill you," she said. "Then I'll make it cost them everything." Facing an empire alone, Kael didn't have an army. He didn't have advanced Aurelian strength. What he had was understanding. He knew their systems, their patterns, their arrogance, and he used all of it. He rerouted defense grids to target the coup forces, triggered chain reactions in their own fleets, turned their coordinated attack into disorganized chaos. They were stronger, but they weren't prepared to be outplayed. One by one, their advantage collapsed, and at the center of it all stood a human, fighting an empire not with power, but with precision. Ending when the dust settled, the coup was over. The traitors were gone, the empire remained. But it wasn't the same. Kael stood once again in the Crystal Hall, the same place where laughter had once filled the air. Now, there was silence, not mocking, not dismissive, respectful. Lyra rose from her throne, fully restored, her presence as commanding as ever. But there was something different in her eyes. "You stood alone," she said. Kael didn't respond. "You faced an empire," she continued, "and you did not break." She stepped closer, and I laughed. For a moment, the entire court held its breath. Then Lyra did something no one expected. She bowed, not deeply, but enough. "I will not make that mistake again." The empire didn't change overnight. It never would. But something had shifted. Strength was no longer unquestioned. Power was no longer absolute. And somewhere within its vast, unyielding structure, a human had carved a place. Not by force, not by fear, but by proving that even the greatest empire could fall if it underestimated the one who stood alone, and this time, no one laughed.